Okay, here we
Hi,
go.
Maggie.
Hi, I was waiting for you. This is so exciting.
Second one.
Okay, so guys, it's 2 o'clock. This is awesome. Let's go. Welcome back to Ask Maggie. You know I'm Maggie Lord, head of wedding planning here. Last week we tackled budgeting, and today we're tackling design and decor. So as I said before, put your question down there in the comment section, and we will go through them, answer everything you need to know so that you are not stressed out and you enjoy your planning process. So with that said, let's dive in. Laura, hit me. What are the questions?
Dive in. All right. So while we wait for some questions to come through, let's start high level. What's your best recommendation for, getting, finding your inspiration for your wedding style? What would you recommend to newly engaged couples or brides about finding their wedding style?
So finding inspiration is super important, and it's because it's going to allow you to communicate your ideas and your design and decor thoughts to all your vendors. So there's a million different places to find inspiration, as we know. There's everything from Pinterest to Instagram to blogs, but what's really important is that you find a source and you start looking at inspiration, pulling those ideas that you like. And here's a tip that I tell everyone. When you find inspiration you like, make sure you save it because you're going to need it. But when you find a picture or something that communicates what you're not going for on your wedding, save that as well. Because when you sit down with a vendor, you can say, this is what I'm going for, and this is the complete opposite. So I highly recommend start with anything visual, whatever, the places that's your choice, but start early and start saving, and little by little, you'll weed out ideas as you move through the planning process.
That's a great point. I love that. Thank you. How about, helping us understand what's the difference between a wedding theme and a wedding style?
Good question. I get this asked all the time when I talk to brides through our David's Bridal Consultation Program. Okay, theme and style. So a style is really like an overarching idea for your wedding, and you usually can sum it up in one or two words. So you might say rustic or industrial or old-fashioned glamour, something like that. So it's kind of like the bigger topic. Then the theme is what you start to weed down to as you go through and find your ideas and your inspiration. So let's just take rustic, because we all know it's my wheelhouse. If you started with rustic as your style, then your theme might be something more like barn or vineyard or campsite, something like that. So you're kind of narrowing it down when you talk about the theme, and style is kind of like the bigger picture.
I love it. Thank you. We got a great question here about renting furniture. We've got someone here that's opening a micro chapel and wants to know if they should start with renting decor and seating so brides can personalize it more, or maybe would you recommend renting or purchasing?
Okay, so it's such an individual thing, right? So when you're thinking about renting any sort of big item that you may have, tables, chairs, tents, all of those sort of things, I recommend renting for sure, right? Because you're not going to get multiple uses out of it. The other smaller decor items, think about tabletop or things maybe for to add candlelight or sort of like elegant little touches. There you have the opportunity to purchase it, and if later you don't have a spot for it in your life, you can also use one of the resale groups and pass it on to another bride. But big ticket items, table, chairs, things like that, I usually think it's best to rent so that you can return.
Yep, makes a lot of sense. I love that. How about your tips and tricks for dressing up a non-traditional wedding venue space to really make it feel elegant, if that's the style a couple's going for?
Yeah, and it's a big question right now, because what we're seeing is couples having to pivot towards other sort of venues because of the venue shortage that we're seeing with how many couples are getting married. So, we're seeing people take on just a park in their local community, or a community center, or anything like a backyard or barn. And of course, what you're going to want to do is dress it up for the wedding day, which makes sense. So to add small touches of elegance, which to me is what always represents a wedding, right? That beauty and elegance. You're really going to want to look for things that can add some drama, such as lighting, whether that's bringing in a lighting professional, whether that's working with candlelight that you may have, or fairy lights, things like that. Besides the lighting, the best thing to do is see where there's bare areas within your venue and add to them with things like greenery. Florals can instantly make a venue feel more romantic. I love when people bring in whether it's like sheer drapes or any sort of like decoration that they can add to windows and things like that. And so think about trying to make the space feel romantic, and it won't feel as overwhelming when you're thinking about having to dress the space for an entire wedding event.
Yep. Awesome. Here's a great question too, Maggie. Can you talk a little bit about like that vintage feel? What are some elements that you may include in a space or in your event to really bring to life that vintage feel?
Yeah, when vintage became a real big wedding sort of style about 10 years ago, I fell in love with it. My favorite thing is vintage china. And there are full-on rental companies across the country that you can rent the vintage china from them. And it just instantly makes your tables and everything feel so fun and beautiful, but you're keeping that vintage feel. So vintage china, I would look into that renting for sure. I have heard of some people going out and hunting for it themselves. I think it's easier to rent, of course, so you can return it. But I also think about the centerpieces. Take into play your florals, right? If you're going to have a very vintagey feel, you might be leaning more towards hydrangea or peonies and away from things like roses or baby's breath. Delicate items such as lace, lace doilies on tables automatically make things feel vintage. Hit up your local vintage stores or secondhand stores. You'll find great things, whether it's any sort of silver frame that you can put pictures in or table numbers. All of those sort of little details really scream vintage to me.
Yeah, I love that. I love the vintage theme too. So all of that speaks to me. You mentioned something here about when talking about vintage. So florals. Let's talk about florals. Do you have to have them? Are there any alternatives? What's your reco?
You do not need to have florals. And of course, a lot of people say, it definitely has to be part of my wedding. And if it has to be part of your wedding, make it part of your wedding. That's what makes your day unique. When you think about the design and decor of a wedding, this is where your personality and your partner's personality and your personality as a couple is going to shine through. It's the opportunity to make it personalized as to who you guys are as a couple. So do you have to have florals? No, you do not. I love when couples get unique with their wedding centerpieces. And instead of florals, they choose things like vintage books. I've seen clocks. I've seen globes. I've seen pictures of the couple at the age that each table number is. So if it's table number 7, framed pictures of the couple when they were 7 years old. Florals are not a necessity. They're lovely. They're beautiful. They're romantic. But you can pick and choose. You can have a bouquet and then not have any other florals. So it doesn't have to be there in the decor to scream wedding, but you also have the opportunity to kind of mix and match things with it.
That's awesome. And also adding some personal touches too. That's great recommendations. We're getting a couple questions about lighting, Maggie. So anything, can you speak to like, is having a lighting expert necessary and uplighting, or can you use what already exists in the space?
Yeah, it is a really good question. And it's one that I think people forget about maybe until they get closer to the event date. So it's really a two-parter for me. So number one, go visit your venue at the time of day that your wedding is going to happen. So many times a couple will go visit a venue, they fall in love with it, but they're touring it on a Saturday or a Sunday at 10 o'clock in the morning. If your wedding's at 5:30 at night, it's not really the same looking venue. So go out there around the time of your wedding, whether it's a formal tour or just a drive-by, and see what the lighting is like. Where is it coming from? Does it have beautiful windows that it's going to come through? Is it going to be darker than you expected because you toured it in 10 o'clock in the morning? So that's my number one tip, is see what natural light is going to be there at your venue at the time of your event. Number two, in terms of having a professional, if you have a large space, I would suggest at least talking to a professional and seeing if they have some areas to help you. It doesn't have to be full-on rigged lighting everywhere and up lighting. It doesn't need to go that far unless you want it to. What you're going to do is when you bring in a professional, they'll help you look at the space and they'll say, these are the areas that you're going to need lighting. These are the areas don't worry about. These are the areas you're going to want to spotlight for your guests. And if you can, think about things at your space that your guests are going to need. They're going to need to get up from their seats and maybe go to the bathroom. They're going to find the bars and they're going to find the dance floor. What is the lighting, right? Where are you trying to guide them? So if you have a big cavernous space that you need to try to make feel intimate, you're going to probably need to talk with a wedding lighting professional. But if not, there's a good chance that you can really take it on yourself by adding fairy lights, white lights, twinkle lights, low lighting as far as candle lights and things like that.
Is that something, Maggie, your photographer could also advise on as you're, talking through your big day with your photographer that you've hired?
Yeah, it's a good point. I do suggest, because those things go hand in hand, I do suggest talking with your photographer. If you can have the photographer come to your venue space with you before the big day, they will help guide you. This is great light. This is where we want to set up for your pictures. This is where we're going to need more light. They obviously have a good eye for what they're going to need as far as lighting. And so it's worth actually getting your vendors together if you can in a room or on a phone call or on a Zoom and just being able to talk through things together, professional to professional.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Okay, so let's talk about rain. I know there's, people say rain on your wedding day is good luck, but what can a couple do to maybe prepare ahead of time for inclement weather on their big day?
Yeah, so I don't think anybody really wants it to rain on their wedding day. I have heard every single cliche in the book. A wet knot is harder to untie than a dry one, right? So yes, rain happens, right? Of course, is it going to stop your wedding day? Absolutely not. So a couple of quick things with that. Number one, always prepare as if it's going to rain so you have your plan. Unless you are a couple who you're having your entire event in one building and you're never going to go outside, there's no cocktail hour outside, nothing like that, then you really don't have to worry about a backup plan. But if you're somebody who has multiple events happening within your wedding, a cocktail outside, you're having the ceremony outside, you really do need to plan. Talk with the venue, see what they have on hand, see what you would need to rent. Sometimes you have to make that call a couple of days ahead of time. And then the other thing is, what the worst case scenario is that you go to either a big box store or online and you buy a bunch of umbrellas to have on hand, right? And I love a cute picture of a bride in her welly boots under her dress. I think it's making the best of a rainy day situation.
Yep, I love that idea. And the pictures turn out gorgeous too, right?
That's right.
All right, we got this great question about, which I think is very relatable. So, what if your personality is very simple and minimalist, but your partner has very different personality and style and taste? How do you kind of blend those two together?
Yeah, I think it's probably, very difficult to find a couple that they sit down to plan their wedding and they both have the same exact vision, right? If that's the case, that is amazing. So most of the time, you're going to come to the table with your idea and vision for your style and your decor, and your partner's going to have something else. So my suggestion is find where you overlap first and where you're going to have to compromise second. So in this case, let's say you want something very minimalist, your partner's looking for something a little bit more grand. See where you overlap. Maybe they're fine with the ceremony being very toned down, and very just relaxed and chill, and that would meet the minimalist vision. And then you guys can pump it up for the reception or things like that. So see where you overlap with thoughts and then see where the areas that you're going to have to compromise. There is always compromising that happens within wedding planning. So, it's not unique. But I think the more that couples can share visuals with each other, it's going to help, because when one person says minimalist, it might mean a different thing to someone else. So share those pictures, those images, and you might find that you're not as far apart on the compromising as you think.
That's a great point. Okay, let's talk about some furniture within the venue. So this specifically around, typically you see a lot of round wedding tables, big banquet tables at weddings. Do couples have to stick with those round tables?
No. I would encourage couples to think outside the round table sort of idea. It's very traditional. It's very banquet style. A lot of times it's what's on hand at a venue. And if that's part of your package and your price and it works for your vision, go rock those round tables. But you do have opportunities for other things. I love the long rectangle tables. I love farm tables where they don't put any sort of covering over them. My absolute favorite is when couples mix and match their tables. They have some long tables, they have some square tables, they have some round tables. It really makes the vibe in the room feel more like a dinner party versus a banquet or a conference. And for most couples, that's what they're trying to do, right? They're bringing all their loved ones together for a big glamorous dinner party. So I would encourage you to mix and match your tables as much as you can. I think it gives it a really fun, unique vibe.
I love this concept of kind of like throwing tradition out the window and just doing what feels natural and right to you as a couple. That's awesome. Let's talk about DIYing your wedding decor. So many couples are inclined to DIY. We touched on it a little bit last week too, Maggie, with the budgeting perspective, but how long would you recommend a couple allot when kind of setting up their decor if they are doing it on their own?
Yeah, so a lot of brides, a lot of couples that I talk to are interested in their DIY, doing it themselves. And, that's great. If you have a skill set or you have friends who have skill sets, then I encourage you to do it. I do think, though, it comes down to very difficult timing the day of or the day before with your venue, because you're going to have to physically be in that space yourself to set up and in many cases break down. So if you're doing all the table displays yourself, I doubt you want to be there 45 minutes before the ceremony when you're all ready to go in your dress. So if you are dead set on DIY and you're setting up for yourself, I encourage you to get a large group of people who you trust hours before the event and make sure that everything is set up well before your ceremony starts. So work with your venue, know the earliest time that you can get in there. And then, and we'll cover this later in our Ask Maggie's coming up in a little bit about planning and the timeline. But this is where those timelines come really in handy, because you're going to need to block the time. How much time do I need to set up for everything? What is my transit time back to maybe my hotel before I get hair and beauty done and then get into my dress and start taking pictures? So if you are setting up for your event yourself, the best thing that you can do is just make sure that you have that time budgeted so that you're not running from setting up to trying to get ready for your big day.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I want to quickly go back to the table conversation. I thought those were great recommendations, great alternatives to the round banquet table. What about the head table? So traditionally you've seen kind of a head table for either just a couple or the full bridal party. What are the options if couples don't want to go that route?
Yeah, that tradition's really kind of been thrown out the window. Again, many couples, that's what they dream about, having their entire wedding party up there with them. And again, if that's your dream, I encourage couples to, bring that to life on their wedding day. But you don't have to. And I say this all the time, there's no rules in wedding planning, which is amazing. You get to make the day perfect for you. So I do suggest to couples, if they're not into the head table, which traditionally, again, would be all of the bridal party, we've seen it come to be very popular that it's just the sweetheart table, which is just the couple and it's the two of them together. And, that is very beautiful. It's a very intimate feeling. They kind of get the spotlight on them. However, some couples, that isn't their vibe either. And I've seen really creative couples come up with things such as having a table with just maybe, if they're having a maid of honor and the best man, and just having it be 4 people at the table. One of my favorite things that I learned from a bride many years ago was she was planning on having both sets of parents sit with them at the table, and it was just going to be that small group. And I thought that was lovely. It was a way for them to really give the spotlight also to these important people in their life. So you can do that as well. So I encourage you, totally just shake it up, make it, however you feel it's going to be right, but you don't have to have a head table anymore. Good to know.
We got a great question about faux flowers and fresh flower alternatives. I know you touched a little bit on, you don't need to have flowers, but what if a couple does want to have florals, but maybe fresh florals aren't in their budget? What's your recommendation there?
Yeah, I mean, in my past 14 years in the wedding industry, it has changed completely as far as florals go. There's a ton of alternatives out there, and there's very unique and cool ones. I was talking to a bride the other day through our Diamond Loyalty consultation, and she was telling me she's having wood flowers that she found online. They were very elegant. She's having a rustic sort of wedding. It really fit in. I've seen companies, of course, that you can rent florals from, and that is a great option. It's a budget saver. You're not skimping on the elegance. I would tell you that probably your guests would not know the difference. Most guests do not go around touching or smelling the florals at a wedding. So, there's a lot of alternatives. I encourage brides to go out there, start looking around, see what they can find. But just having fresh florals is no longer the only way to have that look at your event.
That's great to know. Thank you. So I want to go back to vendors a bit. We've got a few questions around, what's the best way to kind of communicate your vision and style to these vendors that you've secured? You did touch on even getting your vendors together in a room or on a call. It's a great recommendation. How would you recommend couples communicate that to their vendors, their style?
Yeah, I tell everyone you really need to bring that visual representation again, because what you're thinking in your head and the way you're going to be able to explain it is maybe not as easy for a vendor to understand as when you actually give them some sort of inspiration, whether it's pulled off the internet or it's in a wedding magazine or anything like that. So my number one tip is to share that visual representation with them. And then again, lean on them as the professional. So you might talk to them and say, I want these sort of flowers, and this is really what I'm thinking is pretty and everything else. But then listen to what they have to say. They do it day in and day out. Listen to their suggestions. You know, if it's a florist, they might say, oh, this is great, but they don't stay long enough and they look droopy by the end of the night. So communicate visually, but then also listen to what your vendors have to say. They often will come to the table with great ideas. I know I mentioned earlier that you should also maybe bring representation of things that you don't want to see. You know, every once in a while, a bride will say, this is the complete opposite of what I'm looking for. So it'll, you know, it shows both the good and the bad that you are communicating with your vendor. If you have an event planner, really lean on that person to kind of bring the whole group of all the vendors together to talk about what your day is going to look like. If you're not going with a wedding planner or a coordinator, you can certainly do it yourself as a bride. Try, you know, a couple of weeks ahead of time, get all your vendors together, talk through things, have them communicate, and it just means everybody will be on the same page.
Yep, makes a lot of sense. And would you say, you know, when you're doing that initial research and outreach to these vendors to secure them, is it appropriate to ask for, you know, visuals of their prior works that they've done just to get a sense of how they like to operate and how they work?
Yes, always, 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 always. Even if it is a friend of a friend or you've seen their work because of something else, when you sit down to talk to them about what your big day is going to look like, ask to see their prior work, because a lot of times, you know, couples will say, well, it's a wedding photographer. They do this all the time. But there's a million different types of photography. There's editorial and there's, you know, there's more glamorous. And so you really need to sit down with the vendor, talk through your vision, but then ask them for, you know, some of their past work, and it will allow you to see what you're going to get as the end result. It's definitely appropriate. I would say most vendors are, they expect that, they're ready for that. You know, and if they don't, if they're just starting out, maybe they're just starting out as a professional wedding vendor. If you can't see visual representation of their work, then I would ask for some references so you can at least talk to past brides.
Makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. Do your due diligence, your research. Okay, let's talk a little bit about, okay, white is traditionally associated with weddings, right? But and a lot of decor tends to be white traditionally. I think we're seeing that shift away a little bit as we're, you know, kind of getting more creative and personalized in our wedding planning. What about alternatives to like white plates and china at your wedding? What are some options that couples have?
Yeah, a lot of brides they love the color white with weddings, but they don't love that it's just everything white, right? And so a lot of rental companies or venues will have just plain white china available. And you know, if that's what you want to go with, certainly can go with it, but there's a lot of alternatives that I love. I love, as we talked about, the vintage china, which makes a table look so interesting and classy. I also love the colored glass. That has recently become a big trend where maybe you have a dark blue colored plates or dark blue colored wine glasses, or I've seen a lot of the citrus colors with that. And I think that's really unique and interesting. You can find rental houses who have these options. The past, I'd say 5 years or so, we saw the clear plate kind of come to have its moment in the wedding world, where all these plates were beautiful and they were completely see-through. So you can definitely find a tablescape that's going to work for you. I've seen everything from gold china to like the clear glass we've talked about, even the colored. So there's a million different options for you. You can find the right one. You might just have to go through a couple of different rental houses until they have exactly what you want. But I would say get very creative. It does make a big impact on the table.
And what about mix and matching? Is that appropriate for a tablescape?
It is. You know, it's a question I actually got this week from a bride who was talking about her linens, and she wants to do every other table in these different colored linens and kind of alternate. And she really was on the fence and she wasn't sure. And I was telling her that I think that that's really fun and unique. It's special. The room will instantly feel like it was personalized by this couple, right? It's not very cookie cutter. You could definitely mix and match. I've seen it with black and white. I've seen it with champagne or ivory color, mixing it with darker colors. So mixing and matching is great. It's a way to make the room feel instantly more interesting. I think I'm a big fan.
Yeah, and like you said, just kind of unique to that couple too, right? Not so cookie cutter. I love that idea. And we did get a question about timelines, Maggie. So what would you recommend? I mean, obviously decor and design's a really wide category here, but as far as timelines go, what are we looking at when couples are thinking through securing their vendors and looking at their style? How much time do you recommend they allow?
Yeah, so it kind of, one thing kind of lends itself to the next, and it kind of has like this cascading effect. So when you're very early on in the planning process, that's when you're setting up your theme, your style, right? Your venue. And those things will then dictate kind of the rest of what the style and decor looks like, right? So again, back to that idea, if you are getting married in a barn, then you kind of already know what the look and feel is going to look like. So once you kind of lock in those big vendors, I always say the big three, such as your venue and your catering and your photography, once those are kind of locked in, then you can really start to plan the other things. I would say if you get to about 6 months before your event and you haven't started your decor and design elements, you're going to want to. I always say from 6 months to wedding day kind of speeds up very quickly. So as soon as you've locked in your venue, you know, and I always say the dress is part of the design and the decor. It really does lend itself to what the day looks like. You know, so once you kind of have those big things in place, then you can start moving forward with the design and decor.
Makes a lot of sense. And do you have any like favorite tools that you typically use or recommend for couples when they're planning a big event like their wedding?
Yeah, you know, I think that couples can be overwhelmed with all the choices that we have right now to save images and everything else. And so, you know, again, I always think it's best if you find one platform that works for you and you have all your information there and you kind of can keep all your things together. You know, I think that's always the best, and it makes you feel organized and you're not scattered kind of throughout the internet.
Everything's all in one place. Yeah,
Exactly.
I love that. What would you say is like your current, like favorite current trend that you're hearing and seeing a lot about?
I am loving, there's a lot of outdoor weddings happening, right? That's just kind of been a big thing, for the past couple of years, but especially right now. So I love when couples make an outdoor wedding feel very intimate, and whether they're having it in a tent or something, you know, something else outside. I love when they kind of create an environment and bring in like the lounge furniture is one of my favorite things. So you've got little seating areas. And it just makes it feel, because if you're outside, it can feel so big and overwhelming. But by creating kind of that intimate space, I think that's one of my favorite things right now.
I love that idea. We got a question about coastal grandmother trend. What are you thinking about that?
Yes. Oh my gosh, I'm hearing this. I personally love it anyway, but the fact that it has found its way into wedding planning, I think is brilliant. It was only a matter of time. It goes through all parts of the design, from maybe what the mother, the bride slash groom might wear, to the overall style of it. And to me, it really represents cozy and warm and classy and elegant. And I think it's really fun. I can't wait to see some of these brides using the coastal grandmother look when their photography comes out, and you know, 9 to 12 months from now. So I'm interested in seeing how it all plays out.
I love that. Now, Maggie, we're just about at time for today. Do you have any kind of final tips, tricks, things you want to share with the crowd before we wrap up for the day?
Yeah, I'll say really quickly about design and decor that you have to be organized and be disciplined with it, right? I see a lot of brides, they go out and they start buying all sorts of things, and then they're overwhelmed and they overbought for what they need. So, you know, taking a moment, creating a shopping list if you're going to go out and buy things on your own is important. Seeing, you know, inquiring what can you do as far as rentals, look at marketplaces for secondhand things. And then again, just be true to who you are and who you are as a couple, and let that come through in your design and decor. That's my best tip. And of course, we'll be back here on Thursday this week, the 22nd, for another Ask Maggie. So I'm looking forward to that as well.
Yeah, and if you can't make it, you can always sign up for Diamond Loyalty and schedule a consultation with Maggie directly and talk through your big day.
That's right. I love to hear from brides. So please, you know, we can pop on, have a quick conversation about your day, talk through everything with your wedding planning, and we'll go from there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Maggie. Appreciate it. And thanks everyone for joining.
Nice to see you. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.